everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name's Tori and today we are going to be making a kid's shirt with press studs. So the link to this pattern is in the description if you'd like to purchase it. So let's see how it's made. So I've cut out of my pieces. So I've got two of the back yokes. I've done them in the same color, but you don't have to. As in the same color. These are actually an opposite color to the main fabric. I've cut out my collar and I've only interfaced one of them with a medium woven. I don't want it too thick because he is little. And then my main pieces are the dinosaur fabric. So I am going to start with my back piece. So this is the one that you were meant to cut on the fold. And I'm going to show you how I do this. Now obviously it's probably different to everybody else, but that's probably why you're watching. So the first thing I'm going to do is fold it in half and just snip a little triangle so that I can see where the center is. And I'm going to take one of the yoke pieces and do the same thing, because I'm going to need those to eventually line up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this out with the fabric right side up, and I'm going to take my yoke, and it doesn't matter which side I do it, but I'm going to take it and I'm going to pin it at the edge here, and then I'm going to come over to this side and pin it at the edge there. Now obviously this is bigger than the other, but that's so that we can get our little thing. So now I'm going to come up really close to my center point on my yoke, because you'll notice they're not actually lining up. And then I'm going to pull this excess fabric over and do the same to this other side. So you don't need a lot of pins for this, but a couple will definitely help. So now all I need to do, I'm going to show you this up close, is what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this fabric all the way to my snip on my green. So I'm going to push it like that, and then I'm going to flatten out this excess. So I want to push them both so that there's no gap, and then take that excess, which is really hard to do in this angle, and flatten it out. And this is going to make our little tuck. Again, really hard to do all the way back there, but now that I'm up close, I'm going to put two pins, so one on each side of the tuck. It is just a small tuck, it's nothing huge, but it is also for a 4-year-old. So then we get this little dint part here. So then I'm just going to flip it over, and I'm going to take my other yoke piece and put it right sides to the wrong side, and I'm just going to add it into the two end pins. I'm not going to bother taking apart all the middle. This is just to help it guide it through evenly, like so. And then I'm going to start from one end. Make sure that I turn my machine on, might help. And then we're going to stitch and back stitch. And then I'm going to stitch just slowly and steadily over all of the pins. Now I know a lot of people don't like running over pins. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Just pull them out as you go. If you are going to run over pins, I suggest you do it slowly. Like so. And then we're going to back stitch at that end. Trim off that tail so it doesn't annoy us later. And so now you should have a yoke that is right sides out on both sides like this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this one down, and I'm going to have the print right sides up, and I'm going to take my front two main panels. So I want to be putting these right sides together, and I want this straight edge, which is the front of the shirt, to be in the middle when I'm attaching them. So I just want to attach it at the shoulder, but we're just going to baste it in place. So I'm going to just do 1/8 of an inch just to hold it there, because I'm doing my favorite burrito method for this. And then we're going to take the other front main piece and do the same thing again. You will find that this tutorial is very similar to the men's shirt. It mainly differs at the collar and the fact that I'm not doing buttons. Okay, so now that they are both basted here, you want to take this excess and we're going to roll it up, but not the other yoke piece, because we're going to sandwich this inside. So we're going to bring the yoke up and over so it joins to this bit here. Now, for the purposes of the video, I will put a pin. Usually I wouldn't bother though, but this is not a speed sewing video. So I'm just going to put 2 pins so it holds. Now, when you're sewing this, you want to make sure that you're not going to sew your rolled up part. So that's probably why pins would be helpful, especially if you're new to sewing. So you should have it all rolled up there, but there is a definite gap so that we're not going to stitch this together with the rolled burrito bit. And then we're just going to go back to the normal seam allowance and stitch along here. And back stitch, and then I'm going to chain stitch. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to push this up so it crinkles in the middle, because it saves thread, and when I'm speed sewing it also saves a lot of time. And then just snip it apart, pull out your pins and trim off those tails. So now we have this cool little burrito thing. So we're just going to grab the main fabric and pull. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn that like so. So now we've got, there we go. I've got no raw edges anywhere there. And I've got a fun coloured yoke on the back like that. Don't know where those white threads came from, but anyway. So now we're going to, at the shoulder, we're going to put right sides together and we're going to stitch down the sides of the shirt. Now, if I was doing this video as a chain sewing video, I would be sewing all different pieces all at the same time. So I might do a chain sew video after this, because it does make it quicker than having to chop it off each time. But I also don't want to confuse you with what I'm doing. So I'll do one normal and then I'll do a speed sew for you. So again, we're back stitching at both ends. And now we're going to set that aside because we're going to need to overlock it. But before we go to the overlocker, I want to get as much ready as I can so that I only have minimal overlocking. So I'm going to take my short sleeves. I'm only doing short sleeves on these because it is summer here, even though it's not the hottest summer. We don't quite need long sleeve shirts yet. But this pattern does come with long sleeve options. And a hoodie option, actually. So I'm just sewing down the short edge of the sleeves. Making sure I backstitch at both ends to lock all my stitches in place. And then I'm going to trim off those tails. And so now I'm going to go to the overlocker and I'm going to overlock down here, down these sides where I've just stitched on both of them and both sides of this. And then I am also going to overlock the bottom edge of the shirt. So I'm not going to take you to my overlocker because it is quite noisy, but I'm just letting you know. So we're going to overlock the bottom, the two sides we just stitched, and these short sides on the sleeves. So I'll be right back. That's all done now. So everything's been overlocked or serged, depending on where you live and what you call it. Now, I just like to point out that if you don't own a serger, that's okay. You don't have to serge these. But by serging it, I can now just turn it up and stitch it. But I will show you how to make this shirt without that, even though I've serged it for probably no reason. That's okay. So now I'm going to take my sleeves and I'm going to turn them right sides out because I find it easier to do it this way. Now, if you're new to sewing, you're going to want to iron what I'm about to show you because it'll hold in place. But I have made enough shirts that I don't need to. So what we're going to do is, this is the sleeve. So this straight edge here, we obviously need to hem. Now, again, if you want to, you could have just serged it and then folded it up and stitched it. But I'm going to show you how to do it without that. So you're just going to turn it over about 1/4 of an inch and then turn it over another 1/4 of an inch so that that raw edge is disappeared. And we're going to stitch So this is my edge. We're going to stitch as close to this free edge up here as we can. If we stitch close to this edge over here, what's going to happen is when you stitch there, this is going to like hang out and be annoying. So you want to try and stitch on this side. Now these are very small sleeves, so you definitely may want to iron it. So I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch from that fold. And I'm always going to stop with my needle down because I haven't got it ironed. Now if you iron it, it will be quicker to sew, but it's ultimately longer because you have to iron it. But again, if you are new to sewing, please iron it. Just until you get the hang of it at least. You'll notice that most of mine now has just naturally folded into place. It will do that. And we'll back stitch and then we trim off those tails. So now I have a nice cuff with a nice stitched line, and this can't move. So I'm going to repeat that to the other one. But again, also you could have just serged this and just turn it up once and stitch and it will do the same thing. Just depends on what you've got at your disposal, I guess. And I really like this look on a sleeve anyway. That's just me though. You could also make this whole shirt without an overlocker. You could French seam those sides. So instead of overlocking those sides before, you could French seam them. Although I've never tried to French seam an armhole. I don't know how that would go. As you can see, it all kind of just falls into place for you. Especially because it's so small. It doesn't work that well on bigger sleeves, funnily enough. Okay. So that is now both sleeves done. So we're going to attach them to the shirt. So the way I do this, and I will pin one to show you, but please know that I never pin these. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold this in half. And again, we're going to mark that halfway point. So like that, and then trim that. Now, normally you would have to find the halfway point on shirts, but for this particular shirt, the way they've made it, this is actually the halfway point where this yoke joins. So I don't need to mark that because I can see it. So we're going to put this right sides out for a minute, and then we're going to take this bottom seam on the sleeve and match it to that side seam. And then we're going to, once you're pinching it there, you're going to flip all of this over so the shirt ends up inside out. Now, before we do any pinning, you want to make sure that if you've overlocked this, that the seam is going to be sitting the correct way so that there's nothing twisted. And then I'm going to put these seam allowances in opposite directions. So one's on this side, one's on this side. That's just going to help the seam sit as flat as possible, which means it'll be less annoying under your arm. So, for the purposes of this sleeve, I will pin it for you to show you how to ease the sleeve in, although this one's pretty good. So I'm going to put 2 pins at the bottom to hold those things where we want, and then I'm going to come up to this top part and I'm going to pin that where that needs to be, which is right there. So I've got 2 pins at the top, 2 pins at the bottom. So now, when I pull this, you want to kind of make it taut. You don't want to pull it so it's out of shape. You just want to hold it and pin around. Now this one doesn't have as much easing as a men's shirt, but there is still a little bit. So you just want to kind of pin, I want to pin one at the top, one at the bottom, one at the top, one at the bottom, and pin around like this. Now, as you get better at sleeves, you don't pin. You'll be able to just do it. So we're going to do that to the other sleeve that I'm going to do. I still find my centers though and line them up. because I find that the easiest way to make the sleeve fit. Alright, so now I've got lots of pins. I'm going to stitch around. So what I want to do is I want to stitch it so that the sleeve part is facing upwards. That makes sleeves much, much easier. We also need to remember that this is a 3D object, so you do want to hold it like a 3D object. I'm actually finding that the pins are getting in my way. So we're just going to go slowly and then backstitch when we get back to the start. Now I was pulling the pins out as I go because they were in my way. But if they're fine for you, you don't have to do it. And so then we see that the sleeve's in, all lovely and smooth. So now let's do the other one. So I still do it the same way. I'm going to pinch that and then flip this over so that the sleeve's on the inside, so it will face up when I get to here. And then I'm going to line up that seam. I'm going to make sure that it's all lined up. Back stitch. And then I'm going to come and I'm going to hold the center at the center point and then use my fingers like pins and hold it as a 3D object to go around. Always stop with the needle down. That's going to hold everything in place for you. And then I'm going to come and do the other side. So I'm basically just pinching it like my fingers were pins, except they get out of the way. Then we're going to back stitch and trim off all of those tails. Okay, all smooth. Now we will need to overlock that, but I don't need to do that yet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hem the bottom because I like to not have to stand up. We also will need to do some more ironing in a minute, but I will actually iron the next step. Well, the step after the next step. So I'm just going to double fold it like I did with my sleeve. So turn it under. Now again, if you're new to sewing, iron this. It will definitely make it easier for you. But I've had a fair amount of practice, so I don't really need to anymore. Please know that when I first started sewing, I definitely ironed this because it was much easier. But like with anything, you get better with practice. To the end, fold it over, needle down, and back stitch at the end. So now that's the bottom of the shirt hemmed. Now before we go to the iron to do this bit, I'm going to switch to my collar because I'm going to want to iron this as well. So I'm going to just put, there's so many random threads in here today. I'm going to put right sides together. Now again, if you want to, you can pin this. I don't really feel the need, to be honest. You just want to line everything up and then we're going to stitch it. So, back stitch. You don't want to stitch all the way up to that edge. You want to kind of leave a gap because we've got to leave the seam allowance the whole way around. Now, if you're going to struggle with that by eye, may I suggest that you get a ruler and you rule the seam allowance on with an erasable pen or chalk. Just until you get the hang of doing these. Needle down and then down the end. So now I've got, there you go, you can see it better on this side. I've left seam allowance everywhere. Trim off those tails. So now I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut off some of this excess fabric at the corners so that we get nicer turned points. Now this one in here, what we want to do is we want to come at it like a V shape. So you want to chop out the excess like that. You want to do that to both ends. So we're just going to repeat all of that at this end. And by cutting out all that fabric, you'll get a nicer, crisper point. Okay. So then the way I turn it is I put my finger all the way in the corner and I pinch it like this and then push. And you do get most, but not all, of that out of there. And we're just going to push that one. I'm going to come and do the same to this end. So I'm going to put my finger all the way to the corner and then push. And then same with this little bit here. And then I grab my stiletto or sewing awl, depending on what you call it. And I'm just going to flick out the corners of this to make them super pointy. So I'm just putting my stiletto in at the seam and kind of just nudging it out like this, but on a gentler scale. Because I want nice points, but I also don't want to rip through the stitches because then I'll have to turn it back and do it all again. I'm going to do it to the little one here as well. If you're finding that you're still not getting very good points, you may have to trim off some more of that excess fabric. All right, so now we're up to going to the iron. So I'm going to come and take you there so you can see this next step. Easiest thing to do from here, we're going to do the collar first. So all you're going to do is I'm going to roll this in my fingers until I get a nice crisp edge where the line of sewing is. You want that all the way on the end. So I'm just going to use my fingers to do that. And then I'm going to press it. And once I'm happy, I'm then going to shoot it with a shot of steam. My iron's still warming up. That's why that didn't sound very dramatic. There we go. And then I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing just to make sure that both sides are the same. So we're going to iron it, shoot it with steam all the way along. Alright, so that's my collar piece, so I can pop that aside. And then we're going to do the shirt edge where the buttons go. So the first thing you want to do is turn over like 1/4 of an inch. This would be the equivalent of serging it. So this is going to hide that raw edge. You may wish to shoot it with steam so it sits. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn over the next bit. Now this has got, the pattern actually has these lines marked for you. So I'm not really guessing. But it's got markings on the pattern piece to show you how much to turn. So now that I've shot that with steam, that's going to sit there while I do the other side and then stitch it. Ironing can be your friend. So I'm just going to turn over the 1/4 of an inch again. So this is going to hide our raw edge. Shoot it with steam if you need to. And then we're going to come again and roll this over. You want to have it the same amount as the other one. Shoot it with some steam, like so. And so now we're ready to go back and finish sewing it. So I'm going to now stitch this edge down. So I always like to do this from the back because we want that same principle of getting 1/8 of an inch from this edge, and it's obviously easy to see when you can see it. So I'm going to start at the bottom, back stitch as always, and I'm stitching 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And then I'm also going to back stitch at the top. We're not going to see that, the collar's going to hide it. And so now you get this nice line of stitching on this side. I like this pattern because it has very minimal pieces. It doesn't have a separate placard here, and both parts of the collar are in one. So this is a nice quick shirt. back stitch at the end. I know it may not seem quick, but that's because I'm explaining it. So, it's almost finished now. So I'm going to take the shirt and then yoke to yoke at the neck. We're going to fold it in half to find the center. No, I don't want to use those. I want to use my red scissors so I don't cut myself. So just going to chop off a little V, and then we're going to do the same to our collar. Just want to find the center. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the edge I didn't interface. You can also take the edge that you did if you prefer. And I'm going to, oh, not that pin. That pin's very crooked. I'm going to pin it at the center, and then I'm going to come to this edge here, and it's going to line, so that seam at that edge is going to line up with the edge of the shirt. So you kind of open it up a little bit so that you can line it up. And I will show you once I've pinned it because I can't do it that far away from me. So that seam and that seam are lined up. It may not look like it on the camera, but I promise it is. And so then the same general principle as the sleeve, we're just going to ease whatever's left into here. Now it should all fit fine. But just in case it doesn't, we're going to go one side, then the other side, then one side, then the other side to evenly distribute the fabric. If your collar is way too big, you can just come and make this end a little bit shorter. So try and put the weight of your shirt on the table so you're not trying to fight that as well as line everything up. I promise it helps. So again, into the corner, and then pull it so it sits nicely, and then add some more pins. There's not many parts of a shirt I will pin, but the collar is definitely one of them. And I will always iron those where the buttons go, or in this case press studs, because it's just easier to sew when it's ironed. Okay, so that's now attached. So I'm going to start at one end, but I'm going to roll this over so that I can start definitely at the corner, like this. We're going to back stitch, and then we're just going to make sure that the shirt isn't tucked up under where I'm trying to stitch, because it will try to do that. You want it to be nice and smooth under where you're sewing. When you get to the edge, we're going to stop and back stitch, and then trim off those tails, pull out your pins. And so now technically it's attached. So we're going to turn the shirt over so that we're looking at the wrong side. Now if you're putting in a fabric tag, now is the time where you can see where the center is. So you just line it up there. And then I'm just going to tuck this raw edge under and sit it flush and then pin it down. So I'm going to show you that again. So I'm just going to tuck it under and pin it down. Now I've just noticed this, see here, I've got a little pin tuck. I don't want that there, so I am going to cut it out. That was obviously my dodgy pinning work. I don't want that pin tuck thing there. It won't make the shirt look nice. So I'm going to undo the pin I put in so that I can fix the shirt. Remember how I said it's going to try and get up under your needle? That's exactly what happened there. So I'm going to stitch it from the other side where I can see what it's up to. and then back stitch. See, all gone. So now I'm going to go back and repin it. So we're just going to tuck under the raw edge and stick a pin in. Now when you put your pins in, you want to put it from the raw edge and then up. You don't want to do them the other way. It won't hold the fabric there. Trust me, I have played this game many a time. So you want to stick it in and then face it up away from the edge that we are pinning. Now I hold it like this with my fingers on this side to make sure that I don't have another catching excess fabric issue like we just had where I had to fix it. So having your fingers on the other side will help smoothen out the fabric. And then again, and then we're going to tuck this corner in. Now I put a lot of pins in this. I'm not a big believer of pinning if I don't have to, but by having more pins in this, it's less likely to move, and so then you don't have to restitch it or pull anything out. So occasionally pins are definitely worth it. Now when I get to this side, so I don't get myself with the pins, I tend to turn it upside down, but I'm still going to put the pins in the same direction. Like this. And tuck it up and under. Now, actually, while we're here, this corner here where we stitched everything together, if you're struggling, you may want to cut off some of the excess. So you can cut out any excess to make it sit easier if you need to. You just cut out a little bit like this, and what that will do is when we're trying to turn this under, it'll make it less bulky at that edge. Mine wasn't too bad to begin with, but you may have issues there, especially depending on what interfacing you put in your collar. I've only used medium woven, so it's not a very, very stiff collar like you'd find in a men's shirt. But again, it's for a 4-year-old. I can't imagine he wants a crazy stiff shirt, but this will still stand up. Like if he wants to flick it up, this will still stand up if he wants to. Played that game yesterday. All right, so I'm going to stitch it from the wrong side up because technically this is the bit you'll see. So I'm going to stitch all the way along the pins to pull them out, and then I'm going to stitch the whole way around. So it's going to be all top stitched. So I'm going to do it at 1/8 of an inch. We're going to back stitch and then get over that lump there. And we're just stitching along. And at any time you can stop and then come pull your pins out if you need to. You can also pull them out beforehand if you'd prefer to. I know a lot of people do not like sewing over pins. You could also iron this once it's pinned if you've got heat-proof pins. And then you could pull them out to finish stitching it, or pull out half of them. And I just threw the pin on the floor because apparently I have to drop something every video. Just slowly over the pins. I'm going to get to that corner. I'm going to pull all the pins out so I don't stab myself when I turn. And we're going to stitch up, needle down, pivot, in, needle down. Now I've deliberately chosen blue so that it's going to be a little bit of an accent on my collar. But if you're not super confident with your top stitching yet, try and use the same color thread so it's going to blend in a little bit more. It's going to make it less obvious if you make any mistakes. I actually thought about doing lime green, but I thought that might be a bit much. Alright, so we're going to trim off our tails. So the shirt's almost done. I say almost because I still need to go and overlock the armholes, which I will do off camera. And so now we just need to add our closure. But we do technically have a very adorable shirt. And it's got the fun accent on the back. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to line up our placardy part at the front. So you want everything to be level and even. You may even want to pin this if you're struggling a little bit. But I'm just going to line it up like this. And then I'm going to take a ruler and some form of marking implement. Now, I won't be able to see my blue friction pen, so I'm going to use my Choco wheel instead. And I'm just going to start measuring where I want all of my press studs. So you actually probably don't need to line this up with the other one at the moment. You could just pull it out like this. Now on my last one, I did 3 inches apart. So I'm going to do that again on this shirt. So my press studs will be 3 inches apart. Like that. So I get 1, 2, 3, 4, I get 5 press studs. Now I'm not going to mark the other piece. Instead, I'm going to use my stiletto, oops, which is trying to run away. And I'm going to come back here and I'm going to line up these pieces on top of each other. Now to keep it in line, I'm going to line up this bottom and then I'm going to put a pin in it. The pin's going to stop it from moving while I try and line everything up. And then I'm going to come to the top and that should all line up nicely. If it doesn't, I don't know, unpick the bottom maybe and make it line up. Then I'm going to put a pin in the top as well. So now that's going to hold exactly where I need it to, like this. So I'm going to take my stiletto and I'm going to stab it through both layers at the chalk marks I just made. And I'm just going to kind of wiggle it around a little bit in there to make a big enough hole that it's going to stay. And then you can come down and do the bottom hole if you want to. So again, stab it through, wiggle it. And the reason I'm coming from the bottom is because it's easy to gather up the fabric in my hand because the collar's not in the way. Because you don't want to stab through the back of your shirt. You don't want random holes in your fabric. So I find it easier to come up like this. And then we're just going to wiggle it again. So now I've got all of my holes. Now if you were doing buttons, obviously you do this different. You mark your buttonholes, you do your buttonholes, cut them open, and then line this back up, and then you wiggle a chalk pen to mark where the buttons are going to line up for you. Alternatively, you can measure it. So I'm going to take my snaps. Now, luckily, I have some blue ones that will match. Actually, I'll go dark blue. I think the light blue ones can be for Scooby-Doo. That is not what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for. So I got my Kam Press snap things. And because these are the proper branded ones, they actually clip in there for you. So I always like to start with the male piece. So we're just going to screw this one on. So we're going to take a press stud and the male ones are going to be on top. So we're going to do this, push it through the hole, flip it over and squish it down. Now you don't want to push as hard as humanly possible because you will distort the plastic, but you do want it to be quite firm. So again, through the hole, whoops, push, line it up, squish it down. Now I've got enough arm strength sitting down to be able to push this, but if you don't, feel free to stand up. I've also seen people make stands for these where you can rig it and have like a foot pedal. I am contemplating getting my husband to make me one. If he does make me one, I promise to record it. Or at least, you know, do like a half time-lapse video or something. Another one in. Squish it down. I've got one more to go. And then we're going to do the female side. Now I haven't put one on here. Sometimes a lot of people have like a button here. My kid will never wear it, so I just don't bother. Now that potentially sounds lazy, but I don't. He likes to do his things all the way up, and I don't need it to be that tight on him. Alright, so now I've switched to the other end. So I'm going to grab the other side of the shirt. I'm going to push up from the bottom. Oops, lost that one too. I'll get it later. Push it under, line it up, squish her down. No, I didn't have anything in there. That wasn't smart. Oh, I'm having a brain fart kind of a morning. Alright, so now that I've squished this on, it's going to be stubborn to get off. Now, you don't just want to rip it, because what that's going to do is make your hole too big. What I usually do is grab a pair of like side cutters, or like cuttable pliers, and I'll come in and cut that off. So I've got to go to the shed and get that. So it happens when I don't put the thing in. Push it in. Now you don't have to put the piece in the machine. You can actually sit it on here like this. So I'll show you. So you can actually get this piece and sit it on there and then stick it under the machine. That will still work. So if you've bought like off-brand ones that don't quite fit, which by the way are all my other coloured ones over here, that don't sit in there nicely, it will still squish them. You just have to line it up the other way. But I like the fact it holds it. It just makes it one less thing I've got to kind of hold. So now I've got to get this out. And because this is a poplin fabric, there is no stretch in it at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and get some side cutters and cut this off and then replace it. And then the shirt will be finished. So what you want to do is before you go and put the machine away that presses them all together, you want to come along and make sure that you've squished them enough that they actually close. So make sure you test this, and then we're also going to kind of quickly rip them apart to make sure that they're all stuck on properly and nothing's going to fall off. Because we all know kids and they're going to go so you want to make sure that you've squished them enough that they're not going to accidentally fall off. But otherwise, guys, that is the shirt all done. I've just got to go and overlock those armholes and fix that last press stud. So I hope that was helpful. Feel free to come join my group and show me any cool stuff you make. I always love to see people's inspirational ideas. But there you go. Alright guys, see you later.